greet you all in Jesus' name. Today, I wanted to share about Paul's journey to Rome. So, when he was being tried, he appealed to Caesar, and so they sent him to Rome and they put him on a ship with other prisoners. And um, his voyage to Rome started then. And he received a revelation, a warning from God that their journey would be disastrous. And so he shares that with the captain. So we read that in Acts chapter 29, verses 9 through 11. Now, when much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. So Paul received a revelation from God. It was a warning not to proceed with the journey, and he shares that with the centurion. And so what we see here is assessment of risk that's being done by the people there, and probably the helmsman and the owner of the ship had undertaken similar journeys in the past, and based on their past experience, they felt that they would be successful with their journey, and so they decided to go ahead. And so, if you were to translate what happened that day into today's world, today's industry, we see that during turbulent times and during unpredictable times, it's only people with divine insights and revelations. They would be able to accurately advise when it comes to risk assessment and strategies that are proposed by people who are expert in their industries and skilled professionals. They will be unable to make a judgment, or they may take decisions that can have very catastrophic outcomes. So it's very important to have the advice from people who hear from God and who receive revelations from God. So the trip started, and everything was favorable. We see in verse 13 that the south wind blew softly. When the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose called Euroclydon. So for a while, it seemed that Paul was wrong and the owner of the ship and the helmsman were correct. But this success was very temporary, and the scene totally changed when the storm arose. And we see in verse 15 through 20 how the crew battled the storm for many days, and they lost all hope of being saved, and they had lost the will to live and to survive. So in this situation where all people had lost hope, it was a very unusual setting with people outside the church. So here is where Paul began his ministry, and he shares a message of hope that there would be no loss of life. We see that in verse 23, 24, and 25. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. In verses 30 and 31, we see that Paul was keenly watching and observing everything that was happening on board, and he noticed that the sailors were trying to escape, and he immediately informed the centurion. And Paul realized how important it was to have the sailors' input, because they were the only people on board who knew how to operate the ship, and it was very important to have them on board for everybody's survival. And in verse 33, we see that Paul encouraged everyone on board to have food, because it had been 14 days since they had any food. And upon hearing Paul's word of encouragement, everybody took courage and had food. And there were totally 276 persons on the ship. And Paul was the reason everybody survived. So we see a diverse set of people. The captain was there, the soldiers, the sailors, the centurion, the prisoners, and there could have been other passengers. And Paul belonged to the category of prisoners, which was, right at the bottom of the hierarchy. And then he went from right at the bottom to being the captain, to instructing and the captain and the centurion. So when we think of Paul's ministry, we usually picture him within the synagogue, talking to the Jews, debating with the Jews, and preaching to the Gentile believers within the synagogue, and also in the new found church, which was meeting in people's homes. He used to preach there, and now his ministry was expanding. And what he did within the church, he's now doing outside in the secular world. He's counseling and advising the people on board what to do. And so, this is how the church is going to expand. It's through divine counsel and advice that never fails. So during turbulent times and unpredictable seasons, so human thoughts and human advice will fail. And here is when godly people will arise, because organizations and people are saved from disaster when counsel from such godly people are needed, and they are going to be moved to the helm of the organization.